October 14, 1943. Tunisia, North Africa. Oberstfreiter Klaus Hartmann of the 504th Heavy Panzer Battalion watched through his tiger eyes optics as American armor approached across the dusty plain near Medjez el Bab. His commander, Hauptmann Werner Schulz, studied the enemy vehicles with professional interest before breaking into surprised laughter. "They've sent us targets, not tanks," Schulz transmitted to his platoon. "Look at those things. Half-tracks with guns mounted on top. The Americans have truly run out of ideas." Through the heat shimmer, 5 M10 tank destroyers advanced in loose formation. To German eyes accustomed to the squat, heavily armored profiles of their own panzers, the M10s appeared absurdly vulnerable. Open-topped turrets exposed crews to the sky. Thin armor plates that wouldn't stop a determined rifle round. The awkward, ungainly appearance of vehicles designed by committee rather than military genius. What Schulz couldn't know, what none of the German tank commanders positioning for ambush could have imagined, was that they were facing the vehicle that would systematically destroy the myth of panzer invincibility. Within 18 months, these half-tracks with guns would account for more German armor kills than any other American tank destroyer. The 76mm M7 gun they carried would prove capable of penetrating Tiger armor at ranges German doctrine deemed impossible for American weapons. The mathematics of destruction were already loaded in those thin-skinned turrets. A gun that could punch through 109mm of armor at 1,000 yards. A crew trained to shoot first and move fast. A design philosophy that prioritized firepower and mobility over protection, creating a weapon perfectly suited to killing German tanks before they could return fire. Hartmann had served in North Africa since Rommel's early victories. He had faced British Matildas, Crusaders, and American Grants. None had inspired particular fear. German armor superiority was an article of faith, confirmed by countless engagements where panzer gunnery and armor thickness had prevailed. The Tiger he commanded mounted an 88mm gun that could destroy any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 2 kilometers. Its frontal armor, 100mm thick, was effectively impenetrable to most Allied weapons. "The Americans build quantity, we build quality," was the common refrain among panzer crews. German tankers had seen American Shermans brew up after single hits. They had watched British Crusaders disintegrate under German fire. The new American vehicles approaching looked even more vulnerable than their predecessors. Among the 5 M10 crews advancing that October morning were men who would help pioneer American tank destroyer doctrine. Men who understood something German tankers didn't yet realize, that in armored warfare, the vehicle that shoots first usually wins, regardless of armor thickness. That mobility and concealment mattered more than steel plate. That a good gun positioned well was worth more than the best armor positioned poorly. This story is about how tactical doctrine defeated engineering excellence, how American pragmatism trumped German perfectionism, and how panzer crews' laughter turned to fear when they discovered what a 76mm gun could do to their Tigers and Panthers at ranges they thought provided safety. The M10 tank destroyer emerged from an American military crisis in 1941. As German panzers swept across Europe, U.S. Army doctrine struggled to develop an answer to massed armor attacks. Traditional thinking held that tanks fought tanks, but American tanks were inferior to German designs in virtually every measurable category. General Leslie McNair, commanding Army Ground Forces, proposed a radical solution: create specialized tank destroyer battalions equipped with mobile, heavily armed vehicles designed for one purpose only: killing enemy tanks. The vehicles wouldn't need heavy armor if they employed superior tactics: shoot and scoot, ambush from concealment, trade protection for speed and firepower. The M10 that emerged from this doctrine in June 1942 shocked traditional tankers. Built on the chassis of an M4 Sherman, it mounted a 3-inch, 76.2mm M7 gun in an open-top turret with only 37mm of frontal armor, less than half the Sherman's protection. The turret rotated at a glacial 4 degrees per second, requiring the entire vehicle to turn for quick target engagement. It's a suicide machine, complained officers accustomed to traditional tank warfare. The crew is exposed to artillery, the armor won't stop anything, and that slow turret traverse makes it helpless in close combat. But the M10 had advantages that wouldn't become apparent until combat. The open top provided excellent visibility and situational awareness. The thin armor kept weight down to 29.6 tons, giving it excellent mobility and ground pressure. The 76mm gun, while lacking the punch of German 88mm weapons, could penetrate any German tank side or rear armor at combat ranges, and surprisingly, could defeat Tiger frontal armor under the right conditions. Most importantly, American tank destroyer doctrine emphasized something German doctrine didn't: strategic patience. M10s wouldn't charge enemy positions like traditional armor. They would use terrain, wait in ambush, let the enemy come to them. The first shot advantage this provided would prove more valuable than any amount of armor plate. The first combat test came in Tunisia in early 1943. The 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M10s, deployed to North Africa in March. German tank commanders, observing these new American vehicles through binoculars, found them almost comically inadequate. Lieutenant Hans Müller of the 7th Panzer Regiment wrote in his diary, "The new American tank destroyer is poorly conceived. Open turret means vulnerability to airburst shells. Thin armor means our machine guns could probably penetrate at close range. Slow turret traverse means they cannot fight mobile engagements. These vehicles represent American industrial capacity wasted on bad design. Our Panzer IVs will destroy them easily." The initial encounters seemed to confirm German prejudice. At Kasserine Pass in February 1943, before M10s arrived in significant numbers, American armor suffered catastrophic defeats. German tactics emphasized aggressive maneuver and close-range gunnery, where their superior armor provided decisive advantage. American crews, trying to fight German style, were destroyed. But something changed when tank destroyer battalions began implementing their actual doctrine rather than imitating German tactics. At El Getter on March 23, 1943, elements of the 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion faced the 10th Panzer Division in conditions that favored American doctrine: prepared defensive positions, long sight lines, and German forces attacking toward American ambush positions. The Germans advanced confidently. Intelligence reports indicated American tank destroyers were poorly armored and slow to traverse. Panzer commanders planned to close quickly, use their armor advantage, and destroy the Americans in mobile combat. What happened next would be repeated hundreds of times across Europe and would revolutionize American anti-armor doctrine. The M10s, positioned in carefully prepared hull-down positions, opened fire at 1,200 yards, beyond the effective range German commanders thought American guns possessed. Oberfeldwebel Ernst Bahr commanded the lead Panzer IV in the attacking formation. His after-action report, captured when he was wounded and taken prisoner days later, described the engagement. "We advanced expecting to close to 500 meters before American guns could threaten us. At 1,100 meters, my tank was struck in the front glacis by a round that penetrated completely, killing my driver and gunner instantly. The American tank destroyer that fired was invisible, positioned behind a low ridge with only its gun visible. By the time we identified the threat and returned fire, 3 more of our tanks were destroyed." The 76mm M7 gun, firing armor-piercing cap ballistic cap APCBC ammunition, proved far more lethal than German intelligence had assessed. The M62 APCBC round could penetrate 109 millimeters of armor at 1,000 yards at optimal impact angles. Against Panzer IV frontal armor, 80 millimeters, this meant reliable kills at ranges exceeding 1,500 yards. Even the Tiger Eye's frontal armor, 100 millimeters, could be penetrated if M10 crews aimed at the lower glacis plate or turret ring, weaknesses German crews didn't realize American gunners had identified. More importantly, American tank destroyer crews were discovering that their vehicles' weaknesses could become tactical advantages. The thin armor forced careful positioning and use of terrain. The open turret provided 360-degree visibility that fully enclosed German turrets couldn't match. The 76mm gun, while less powerful than the German 88mm, was powerful enough to kill any German tank if properly employed, and its lower profile made concealment easier. By May 1943, German after-action reports began reflecting grudging respect mixed with confusion. Hauptmann Friedrich Steinmann, commanding a company of Panzer IVs, wrote, "American tank destroyer tactics are unconventional and effective. They refuse to fight on our terms. When we advance, they fire from concealment and withdraw before we can close. When we pursue, we enter kill zones covered by other tank destroyers we didn't detect. Their vehicles are individually inferior, but collectively deadly. We kill them when we catch them exposed, but they kill more of us overall because they rarely allow us to use our advantages." The North African campaign provided American tank destroyer crews with priceless combat experience. They learned to maximize their vehicle strengths, use terrain religiously, never expose the thin armor unnecessarily, shoot for maximum effective range, and relocate immediately after firing. German doctrine emphasized aggressive maneuver and direct fire duels where armor thickness mattered. American doctrine emphasized ambush, first shot kills, and survival through mobility and concealment. The invasion of Sicily in July 1943 and Italy in September 1943 gave M10 crews new terrain that favored their tactics. The mountainous Italian landscape provided endless hull-down positions, restricted German armor maneuver, and created situations where American tank destroyers could engage at their preferred ranges while German tanks struggled with limited mobility. At Salerno in September 1943, the 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion faced multiple German counterattacks, including assaults by Tiger is from the 508th Heavy Panzer Battalion. The Tigers, nearly invincible when properly employed, had 100 millimeters of frontal armor that American 75 millimeters Sherman guns struggled to penetrate even at point-blank range. Lieutenant Tom Morrison, commanding an M10 in the 601st, described the first Tiger engagement. "We saw it coming down the road, massive, terrifying. The gun so long it seemed impossible. Our intelligence briefings said the 76 millimeters couldn't penetrate Tiger frontal armor reliably. But I remembered what the instructor said. If you can't penetrate the front, don't shoot at the front." We waited until the Tiger turned to engage a Sherman position. At 800 yards, I fired at the side armor. The round penetrated behind the drive sprocket. The Tiger stopped immediately, began smoking, and the crew bailed out. We'd killed a Tiger with a gun everyone said couldn't do it. The key was tactical patience and shot placement. The Tiger's side armor was only 80 millimeters thick, well within the 76 millimeters gun's penetration capability at combat ranges. American crews learned to wait for the shot rather than take the shot. Let the Tiger expose its flank while engaging other targets. Fire once with careful aim rather than multiple times with rush shots. Relocate immediately because the Tiger's 88 millimeters gun would destroy an M10 with a single hit anywhere on the vehicle. German crews who survived encounters with M10s began reporting something unusual. American tank destroyers seemed to know Tiger weak points that even some German crews didn't know existed. The turret ring, where 100 millimeters frontal armor transitioned to the turret, was vulnerable to 76 millimeters fire at ranges under 1,000 yards. The lower front hull plate, angled but slightly thinner, could be penetrated by careful shots. The commander's cupola, if struck precisely, could jam the turret or even penetrate into the crew compartment. American intelligence had done something German intelligence rarely did systematically. They analyzed captured German tanks exhaustively, identified every weakness, mapped every vulnerable spot, and trained gunners specifically on these targets. The M10 gun might be less powerful than German weapons, but American gunners knew exactly where to aim it for maximum effect. By December 1943, over 4,900 M10 tank destroyers had been produced. They equipped 40 tank destroyer battalions in the U.S. Army, with more being delivered to Allied forces. The British received 1,648 minutes and 10 seconds, which they modified by installing their superior 17-pounder gun, creating the Achilles variant that could defeat any German armor at ranges approaching 2,000 yards. The build-up to D-Day saw intensive training as M10 battalions prepared for combat in Western Europe. Crews practiced on mock-ups of German Panthers and Tigers, learning the silhouettes, identifying weak points, drilling on engagement procedures until they became automatic. Gunners practiced range estimation obsessively, knowing that first-round hits at maximum range were the difference between killing German tanks and being killed by them. The Panther, introduced in mid-1943, represented Germany's response to Soviet T-34s and theoretically outclassed anything the Americans fielded. Its 75mm KWK-42 gun could penetrate 138mm of armor at 1,000 yards. Its frontal armor, 80mm, but sloped at 55 degrees, provided effective protection equivalent to 140mm of vertical armor. Against this, the M10's 37mm of frontal armor was effectively meaningless. Any German tank gun would penetrate it effortlessly. But American tank destroyer doctrine had never relied on armor. The M10's advantages lay elsewhere. Superior numbers, better crew training, tactical flexibility, and the willingness to trade casualties for kills rather than seeking the perfect invulnerable vehicle. June 6, 1944. Normandy, France. The 803rd Tank Destroyer Battalion landed on Utah Beach as part of the American invasion force. Within hours, M10s were advancing inland, and within days, they would face German armor in the hedgerow country of the Bocage, terrain that negated many German advantages while amplifying American ones. The Bocage, with its dense hedgerows creating countless small compartmentalized fields, was nightmarish for armor operations. Visibility rarely exceeded 100 yards. Roads were narrow, raised, and exposed. Every field was a potential ambush site. German defenders used the terrain expertly, positioning Panthers and Tigers in prepared positions that maximized their armor and gun advantages. But the Bocage created situations where American tank destroyer doctrine proved superior to German Panzer doctrine. In the close terrain, tactical surprise mattered more than armor thickness. The side of a Panther was just as vulnerable as the side of an M10, and American crews became expert at manufacturing situations where they got side shots at German armor that couldn't effectively return fire. Staff Sergeant Lafayette Pool, commanding an M10 in the 702nd Tank Destroyer Battalion, became one of the war's most prolific tank killers using tactics that exploited the M10's unique characteristics. His technique, widely copied throughout American tank destroyer units, involved positioning his M10 where German armor would pass, while moving between fields. The Germans focused on the narrow gaps in hedgerows and vulnerable while maneuvering through them, often never saw Pool's M10 until the 76mm gun fired. You let them get halfway through the gap, Pool explained in a post-war interview. They're buttoned up because the hedgerows block visibility. Their turret is usually facing forward because they're worried about ambush from ahead, not the flanks. You aim at the drive sprocket or the turret ring, fire once, and relocate before their friends figure out where the shot came from. In Bocage fighting, the M10's thin armor didn't matter, because if you were getting shot at, you'd screwed up already. Pool would be credited with 258 enemy vehicles destroyed during his service, making him one of the most lethal American tank destroyer commanders of the war. His success came not from the M10's armor, which saved him exactly 0 times, but from tactics that prevented German guns from ever targeting him in the first place. The German perspective on M10s began shifting from mockery to wary respect. Oberst Hans von Luck, commanding the 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment, wrote in July 1944, "The American tank destroyer is more dangerous than we initially believed, not because of its armor, which remains negligible, but because of how they employ it. They don't fight like tanks, charging forward. They fight like anti-tank guns, from ambush, then relocate. By the time we identify their position and bring fire, they've moved. Their 76mm gun can penetrate Panther side armor reliably, and they've learned to wait for side shots rather than engaging frontally where our armor advantage applies. The Battle of Arracourt in September 1944 would provide the definitive demonstration of M10 effectiveness against German armor. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M10s, faced the 113th Panzer Brigade in a series of engagements that would produce the most lopsided armor battles of the Western Front. September 19, 1944. Near Arracourt, France. Major General John Wood's 4th Armored Division, including the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, held positions against German counterattacks aimed at Patton's exposed southern flank. The Germans committed the 5th Panzer Army, including newly formed brigades equipped with 88 Panthers and 35 Panzer IVs. German commanders planned to use their armor superiority to overwhelm American positions through aggressive maneuver. The Panthers, with their 75mm high-velocity guns and sloped armor, were theoretically dominant over American Shermans and M10s. German doctrine emphasized closing to medium range, where Panther armor would provide protection, while their guns destroyed American vehicles. Lieutenant Edwin Leeper commanded an M10 platoon positioned on high ground overlooking the likely German approach. His position was carefully chosen, a slight rise that provided visibility over open fields but kept his M10s hull down, exposing only turrets. The morning fog that covered the battlefield would lift directly into morning sun, backlighting German armor, while leaving American positions in relative shadow. At 0630 hours, the fog began lifting. Through his binoculars, Leeper saw the unmistakable silhouettes of Panthers advancing in company strength across the open fields below his position. Approximately 15 vehicles, moving at speed, apparently confident that morning fog provided concealment and that American armor wouldn't be positioned so aggressively forward. The Germans came on like they owned the battlefield. Leeper recalled decades later. Panthers in line formation, probably 30 miles per hour, which was fast for a 45-ton tank. They hadn't spotted us because we were hull down and the sun was in their eyes. I waited until the lead tank was at 1,000 yards, where I knew the 76mm would punch through side armor if I hit the suspension or turret ring. I gave the order to fire. 5 M10s fired simultaneously. At 1,000 yards, against the Panther's 40mm side armor, the 76mm M62 APSBC round was devastatingly effective. 3 Panthers stopped immediately, one exploding as its ammunition detonated. The remaining tanks scattered, trying to identify where the firing had come from, but the M10s were already relocating to alternate positions prepared earlier. The engagement lasted 14 minutes. When it ended, 11 Panthers were destroyed or disabled. The M10s suffered 0 casualties because German return fire, rushed and aimed at positions the M10s had already vacated, struck empty ground. German after-action reports from Arracourt reflected shock. How had American tank destroyers, supposedly inferior vehicles, achieved such one-sided results against Germany's best tanks? The answer lay in understanding that the M10 wasn't trying to be a better tank than the Panther. It was designed for a different type of fighting entirely. Over the 5-day Battle of Arracourt, American forces, including M10 tank destroyer battalions, destroyed 281 German tanks and assault guns while losing 31 American tanks and 10 minutes and 10 seconds. The kill ratio approached 7-1 in favor of the Americans, exactly the opposite of what German armor doctrine predicted when German tanks faced supposedly inferior American vehicles. General Lieutenant Otto von Manschafel, commanding the 5th Panzer Army, submitted a report analyzing the defeat. American tank destroyer tactics neutralized our armor advantages. Their vehicles are inferior in direct comparison, but they refuse direct comparison. They engage from prepared positions at ranges where their guns are effective, but where our armor advantage provides less benefit. They aim at weak points, sides, turret rings, suspensions, rather than engaging frontally where our armor is strongest. Most critically, they accept their vehicles' limitations and fight accordingly, while we attempted to employ our vehicles in situations where their advantages could not apply. The M10's combat record by late 1944 was becoming undeniable. tank destroyer battalions equipped with M10s were accounting for German armor at ratios that exceeded Sherman tank battalions, despite facing the same enemy. The 601st, 602nd, 607th, 654th, 702nd, 704th, 803rd, and 899th Tank Destroyer Battalions all achieved kill ratios exceeding 5-to-1 against German armor. The secret wasn't the vehicle. It was the doctrine and the men who implemented it. M10 crews understood they were in thin-skinned vehicles that German guns would destroy with single hits. This knowledge forced tactical excellence. They learned terrain intimately, positioned perfectly, fired with precision, and relocated religiously. German tankers in heavily armored vehicles sometimes grew complacent, relying on armor to protect them from mistakes. M10 crews couldn't afford mistakes. Staff Sergeant John McQuaid of the 702nd Tank Destroyer Battalion described the mindset. In a Sherman, you might survive getting hit. The armor might stop around, or you might get lucky. In an M10, you knew any hit would probably kill you. So you made damn sure not to get hit. You picked your spot, you waited for the perfect shot, and you fired once and moved. The Germans in their Tigers and Panthers sometimes forgot that in tank fighting, whoever sees the other guy first and shoots first usually wins, regardless of armor. We never forgot. The Bocage fighting and Arracourt established patterns that would repeat throughout the remainder of the war. M10s continued to kill German armor at impressive rates, but not through superior technology. Through superior tactics, better crew training, and doctrine that maximized strengths while minimizing weaknesses. By December 1944, the M10 was being supplemented and replaced by the M36 tank destroyer, which mounted a 90mm gun capable of defeating any German armor frontally at combat ranges. But the M10 remained in service through war's end, still lethal, still feared by German crews who had learned that thin armor didn't mean weak vehicle. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 provided the M10's final major test. German forces, including 400 tanks and assault guns, attacked through the Ardennes in Hitler's last major offensive in the West. Among the defenders, multiple M10 battalions found themselves in desperate combat against massed German armor in conditions that theoretically favored the Germans. Winter weather, limited visibility, close terrain, and German numerical superiority. At St. Vith, the 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M10s, faced elements of the 1st SS Panzer Division and 116th Panzer Division. The Americans were outnumbered approximately 3:1 in armor. German doctrine suggested this should result in American defeat. Instead, American tank destroyer doctrine created a mobile defense that destroyed German armor at rates German planners hadn't anticipated. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Jordan, commanding the 814th, positioned his M10s in mutually supporting positions along likely German approach routes. Rather than trying to hold fixed positions, he planned a fighting withdrawal where M10s would engage from ambush, destroy German vehicles, and relocate to the next prepared position before German artillery could range them. The tactic worked devastatingly well. German Panther and Panzer IV companies advancing towards St. Vith found themselves channeled into kill zones where multiple M10s engaged from different angles. German armor doctrine emphasized mass and maneuver, but the close terrain prevented effective maneuver, and American positions were too well chosen to assault frontally. Obersturmbannführer Herbert Kuhlmann, commanding a Panther company in the 1st SS Panzer Division, described the frustration. We advanced through the forest toward American positions. The road was narrow, visibility perhaps 50 meters. Suddenly, the lead Panther exploded, struck from the side by a gun we couldn't see. We deployed off the road, but movement through the trees was impossible for 45-ton tanks. A second Panther was hit, then a third. By the time we identified the American tank destroyer positions, they had relocated. This pattern repeated throughout the day. We lost 8 Panthers and achieved nothing. Over the 5 days that St. Vith held, the 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion was credited with 55 German tanks and assault guns destroyed. The battalion lost 12 minutes and 10 seconds, most to German artillery and infantry assault rather than tank fire. The tactical success came from understanding that the M10's mission wasn't to trade shots with German tanks. It was to kill German tanks while avoiding return fire entirely. By January 1945, German tactical assessments of American armor had evolved considerably from the mockery of 1943. A captured German intelligence document titled Analysis of American Tank Destroyer Tactics provided a sober evaluation. American tank destroyer vehicles, particularly the M10, are technically inferior to German armor in armor protection, gunpowder, and mechanical reliability. However, American tank destroyer doctrine is superior to German anti-tank doctrine in tactical flexibility, crew initiative, and integration with combined arms. American tank destroyers achieve superior results not through vehicle quality, but through tactical excellence, and accepting casualties as acceptable cost of mission achievement. The document continued with recommendations that revealed how completely German respect for M10 tactics had grown. When American tank destroyer units are identified in an area, avoid frontal attacks against prepared positions. Avoid movement through restricted terrain where ambush is likely. Engage only when numerical superiority exceeds 3:1 and artillery support is available. If engaged by tank destroyers from ambush, immediately deploy smoke and withdraw rather than attempting to locate and destroy them, as they will relocate before effective return fire is possible. These recommendations represented the complete opposite of early war German doctrine, which emphasized aggressive offense and reliance on armor superiority. The M10, with its thin armor and supposedly inadequate gun, had forced the Wehrmacht to fundamentally revise how they approached American armor. The statistics of M10 combat service support the tactical success. Of 6,406 minutes and 10 seconds produced, approximately 4,800 saw combat service. American tank destroyer battalions equipped with M10s were credited with 3,652 German tanks and assault guns destroyed during the war. The loss ratio varied by theater and period, but typically ranged between 3:1 and 7:1 in favor of the M10s. More importantly, M10 battalions achieved these results while suffering lower casualty rates than Sherman tank battalions facing similar opposition. The reason was doctrinal. M10 crews understood their vulnerability and fought accordingly, while Sherman crews sometimes relied on armor that proved inadequate against German guns. Lieutenant General Jacob Devers, commanding 6th Army Group, stated in February 1945, "The tank destroyer concept, particularly as embodied in the M10, has proven itself in combat." Critics claimed the thin armor made it a death trap, but casualty rates tell a different story. Tank destroyer battalions achieve higher kill ratios with lower losses than tank battalions because their doctrine emphasizes tactics over technology. The M10 succeeded because it was designed for a specific mission, and American crews executed that mission brilliantly. The British experience with M10s provided additional confirmation. The 1,648 minutes and 10 seconds delivered to British and Commonwealth forces equipped 16 regiments. British crews, accustomed to the even thinner armor of their Cromwell and Crusader tanks, adapted quickly to M10 tactics. In Italy particularly, where mountainous terrain favored ambush tactics, British M10 regiments achieved kill ratios exceeding those of Churchill tank units, despite the Churchill's superior armor. British crews particularly praised the M10's gun. While American forces were transitioning to the 90 mm armed M36 in late 1944, British regiments began mounting their 17-pounder gun in M10 hulls, creating the Achilles variant. The 17-pounder could penetrate 208 millimeters of armor at 1,000 yards, making it capable of defeating Tiger II frontal armor, something few Allied guns could reliably do. The Achilles demonstrated what the M10 chassis could achieve with an even more powerful gun. British crews reported that the combination of the 17-pounder's penetration with M10 mobility and crew visibility created arguably the most effective Allied tank destroyer of the war. German commanders facing Achilles-equipped units reported that the 17-pounder's penetration removed the last vestiges of German armor advantage. Sergeant William Deney, commanding an Achilles in Italy, described the psychological impact on German crews. We engaged a Tiger II at 1,600 yards. First round penetrated the frontal armor and brooded up. The Germans knew their Tiger II was theoretically invulnerable to Allied guns frontally. When we killed it from the front at long range, it shattered their confidence. After that engagement, German tanks in our sector became extremely cautious, often refusing to advance even when they had numerical superiority. As the war entered its final months in early 1945, M10s continued in frontline service despite the availability of more heavily armed M36 tank destroyers. Many battalions retained their M10s by choice, with crews who had learned the vehicle's capabilities preferring the familiar and proven system over newer equipment they'd need to learn. The crossing of the Rhine in March 1945 saw M10s supporting American armor as it pushed into Germany. The open terrain east of the Rhine theoretically favored German armor, but by this point German tank strength had collapsed. Fuel shortages, ammunition shortages, and loss of experienced crews meant that even formidable Tigers and Panthers often sat immobilized or operated by inexperienced crews who couldn't effectively employ them. M10 crews found themselves increasingly engaging German armor that was tactically poorly positioned or operated by crews with minimal training. The battles became one-sided not because American vehicles were superior, but because American crew quality, logistic support, and tactical doctrine had overwhelmed German advantages. Oberst Dietrich von Koltitz, captured in April 1945, provided a final German assessment of the M10. We laughed at the American tank destroyer when we first encountered it. Thin armor, open turret, slow traverse. It violated every principle of German armor design. But Americans weren't trying to build a German tank. They built an American tank destroyer, designed for American doctrine, operated by well-trained crews with adequate support. By war's end, we feared those thin-skinned vehicles as much as any Allied armor because we knew the crews inside were experts at killing German tanks, and our armor advantage meant nothing if we never got a shot before being destroyed. The post-war analysis of M10 effectiveness revealed several key factors in its success. First, American tank destroyer doctrine emphasized the mission, killing enemy tanks, over vehicle survivability. M10 crews accepted higher risk in exchange for offensive effectiveness. Second, excellent crew training meant American gunners could exploit the 76mm gun's capabilities fully, achieving first-round hits at maximum effective range. Third, tactical flexibility allowed M10 crews to adapt to varied terrain and situations, using the vehicle's strengths while avoiding situations where weaknesses mattered. Perhaps most importantly, the M10 represented a fundamental difference in American versus German military philosophy. German design emphasized creating the perfect vehicle, the Tiger, the Panther, vehicles that were individually superior, but complex, expensive, and difficult to produce and maintain. American design emphasized creating adequate vehicles in overwhelming numbers, operated by well-trained crews with excellent logistic support. The M10 was never the best tank destroyer theoretically possible. Its armor was inadequate. Its gun was merely good rather than excellent. Its turret traverse was painfully slow. But 6,406 of them were built and deployed, crewed by trained soldiers, supported by robust logistics, and employed according to doctrine that maximized their effectiveness. The result was one of the most successful armored vehicles of World War II, measured not by specifications, but by combat results. In 1947, the U.S. Army conducted comprehensive after-action analysis of World War II armor engagements. The study examined kill ratios, loss rates, and tactical effectiveness of all American armored vehicles. The findings surprised many who had assumed more heavily armored vehicles would prove most successful. The M10 tank destroyer achieved the second highest kill ratio of any American armored vehicle, exceeded only by the M36, which carried a more powerful gun. More significantly, M10 battalions suffered lower loss rates per engagement than Sherman battalions, despite facing similar opposition. The study concluded the M10's success derived from doctrine that emphasized tactical positioning, first shot kills, and mobility over protection. Crews in vulnerable vehicles developed tactical excellence that crews in better protected vehicles sometimes lacked. The M10 proved that in armored warfare, how a vehicle is employed often matters more than the vehicle specifications. German tank commanders, captured throughout the war, provided consistent testimony about M10 effectiveness during post-war interrogations. General Major Friedrich von Mellenthin, who had commanded panzer forces against American armor, stated, "We underestimated American tank destroyers initially because we judged them by German standards. We asked, why would you build a tank with no armor, and missed the point. Americans weren't building tanks. They were building mobile anti-tank guns crewed by soldiers trained to avoid being shot at. Once we understood this, we respected them, but by then they were destroying our armor faster than we could replace it." Hauptmann Otto Carius, one of Germany's most successful tank aces with 150-plus kills, encountered M10s in Normandy. His assessment was blunt. The M10 was dangerous because the crews knew they were in death traps if they made mistakes. This made them careful, patient, and deadly. They would wait hours for the perfect shot. In a Tiger, you sometimes grew confident and made mistakes because you knew the armor would protect you. M10 crews couldn't afford mistakes, so they rarely made them. I would rather face a Tiger crewed by average soldiers than an M10 crewed by experts. The M10's combat service didn't end with World War II. Surplus M10s were distributed to Allied nations under various military aid programs. The British retained Achilles variants into the 1950s. Denmark, the Netherlands, and Belgium operated M10s into the 1950s as well. In the hands of well-trained crews, the M10 remained an effective tank destroyer a decade after its design, testament to the soundness of its basic concept. Some M10s saw combat in the Korean War, though in limited numbers. The mountainous Korean terrain favored the M10's mobility, and its 76mm gun remained adequate against North Korean T-3485 tanks. The open turret, criticized as a vulnerability in Europe, proved advantageous in Korea's hot summer climate. The ultimate vindication of M10 design philosophy came from an unexpected source. In the 1950s and 1960s, as NATO forces developed post-war armor doctrine, many nations adopted vehicles that resembled M10 design principles. Thin armor, powerful guns, high mobility. The French AMX-10, the British FV-4005, and even modern tank destroyers emphasized firepower and mobility over protection, validating the M10's original concept. The American Stryker MGS mobile gun system, deployed in the 2000s, mounted a 105mm gun in a lightly armored wheeled vehicle, essentially a modern evolution of M10 doctrine. The emphasis remained unchanged: mobility, firepower, shoot-first tactics, and avoid being hit rather than surviving hits. Modern military analysts studying World War II armor combat consistently cite the M10 as an example of doctrine triumphing over technology. The vehicle specifications suggested vulnerability and limited effectiveness. Its combat record proved the opposite. The difference was American willingness to accept a doctrinal approach that prioritized mission effectiveness over crew protection, combined with training that gave crews the skills to survive through tactical excellence rather than armor thickness. The human cost of M10 service must be acknowledged. Tank destroyer battalions suffered significant casualties, though lower than critics predicted. The open turret meant crews were vulnerable to artillery airbursts, small arms fire from elevated positions, and infantry assault. The thin armor meant any penetrating hit usually proved fatal. Approximately 2,300 American tank destroyer crewmen died in combat during World War II, with M10 crews comprising the majority. But these casualties must be measured against results achieved. M10 battalions killed German tanks at ratios that often exceeded 5-1, meaning that for every American tank destroyer crew killed, German tank crews died in greater numbers. In the brutal mathematics of industrial warfare, this constituted success. The M10 achieved its mission, destroying enemy armor, at acceptable cost. Staff Sergeant Lafayette Pool, who survived the war despite commanding an M10 through some of the heaviest fighting, reflected in a 1982 interview, Was the M10 dangerous to crew? Absolutely. Did men die in them? Too many. But we killed a hell of a lot more Germans than they killed of us. And we helped win the war. The M10 wasn't designed to keep us safe. It was designed to kill German tanks. It did that job better than anything else we had until the M36 came along. I wouldn't have wanted to crew anything else. The technical specifications that German tank commanders mocked in 1943 remained unchanged throughout the war. 37 mm frontal armor that any German tank gun could penetrate. Open-top turret that exposed crews to artillery and air attack. 76 mm gun that was less powerful than German 88 mm weapons. Slow turret traverse that made the vehicle vulnerable in close combat. Yet these supposedly fatal flaws never prevented the M10 from achieving combat success. The explanation lies in understanding that vehicle specifications matter far less than how vehicles are employed. The M10 was designed for a specific tactical doctrine. Engage from ambush at maximum effective range, achieve first-round kills through superior gunnery, and relocate before enemy return fire. Within this doctrine, armor thickness was irrelevant because the vehicle wasn't supposed to be shot at. Turret exposure was acceptable because crews needed visibility more than overhead protection. Gunpowder was adequate because the 76 mm could kill any German tank if aimed at vulnerable points. German doctrine, by contrast, emphasized armored duels, where vehicles would exchange fire and superior armor would prevail. This doctrine drove German design toward ever thicker armor and more powerful guns. The Tiger II, ultimate expression of this philosophy, carried 185 mm of frontal armor and an 88 mm gun that could destroy any Allied vehicle at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. It was theoretically invincible. But the Tiger II weighed 69 tons, consumed enormous quantities of fuel, broke down frequently, and only 489 were built. Each Tiger II represented resources that could have produced 5 or 6 Panzer IVs. Meanwhile, America produced 6,406 minutes and 10 seconds, each one adequate for killing German armor, when properly employed. The industrial arithmetic overwhelmed German technical superiority. The Battle of Arracourt crystallized this reality. German Panthers, technically superior to M10s in every specification, were destroyed at rates approaching 10:1 because American doctrine proved superior to German doctrine. German crews drove excellent vehicles poorly. American crews drove adequate vehicles excellently. The result was never in doubt. By early 1945, captured German documents revealed the complete transformation in Wehrmacht assessment of American tank destroyers. A February 1945 tactical bulletin distributed to Panzer units stated, American M10 tank destroyers must be treated as serious threats despite thin armor. Crews are well trained and employ excellent tactical discipline. Vehicle's 76 mm gun can penetrate Panther and Tiger armor at flanks and rear and frontal armor at certain points. Do not assume M10s will engage in mobile combat, where our armor advantages apply. Expect ambush from concealed positions at maximum range. Do not pursue M10s that retreat, as this often leads into prepared kill zones. If possible, engage M10s with artillery rather than armor, as their thin armor makes them vulnerable to high explosive shells, while direct engagement with armor often results in German vehicle losses. These recommendations represented complete reversal from 1943 assessments. What had been dismissed as half-tracks with guns were now classified as priority threats requiring careful tactical consideration. The vehicle hadn't changed. German understanding had. The photographic record from the war provides visual evidence of M10 effectiveness. Images of destroyed German armor frequently show catastrophic kills, turrets blown off, ammunition explosions, complete vehicle destruction. These weren't the result of marginal penetrations. The 76 mm M62 APCBC round, when it penetrated, typically caused devastating internal damage. The kinetic energy of the 15-pound projectile traveling at 2,600 feet per second created massive spalling inside enemy vehicles, along with the explosive effect of the round's small bursting charge. German tankers who survived M10 attacks consistently described the effects as more catastrophic than they expected from a medium gun. Unteroffizier Hans Becker, who bailed out of a Panther struck by M10 fire, stated, "The round came through the side armor near the turret ring. I was loader, standing in the turret. The man across from me, the gunner, simply ceased to exist. The interior of the tank became an inferno of metal fragments and fire. I don't know how I got out. When I looked back at the Panther, the entire turret basket was destroyed. That medium American gun had destroyed our tank as thoroughly as an 88 mm would have. The sound of the 76 mm M7 gun also became distinctive to soldiers on both sides. The high-velocity weapon produced a sharp, cracking report quite different from the deeper boom of German 88 mm guns or the lighter sound of 75 mm weapons. German soldiers learned to identify M10s by sound, which often meant an engagement had already begun and German armor was being destroyed. You would hear that sharp crack and you knew American tank destroyers were working," recalled Gefreiter Wilhelmeyer, who served in a Panzer Grenadier unit in France. "Usually we would hear it 3 or 4 times in quick succession, and then our Panthers or Panzer IVs would be burning. The Americans fired fast and accurately. By the time we identified where they were shooting from, they had usually displaced already." The crews who operated M10s came from diverse backgrounds, united by training that emphasized gunnery excellence, tactical patience, and understanding of their vehicle's capabilities and limitations. Many were former tankers who transferred to tank destroyer units. Others were fresh recruits who trained exclusively on the M10 system. All received intensive instruction on German armor recognition, weak points, engagement tactics, and survival techniques. The training emphasized realism that sometimes shocked new crews. Instructors would repeatedly demonstrate how quickly German guns could destroy an M10 if it was improperly positioned or exposed. Live-fire exercises used captured German weapons to show trainees exactly what enemy fire could do to their vehicles. The message was clear: your armor will not save you. Your tactics must save you. This training philosophy created crews who understood their vulnerability and compensated through tactical excellence. Unlike some Sherman crews who learned through bitter combat experience that their armor was inadequate, M10 crews never had illusions about survivability through protection. They knew from day one that survival meant not being shot at, which meant perfect positioning, excellent gunnery, and immediate relocation after engagement. The tactical flexibility this mindset produced gave American armor an advantage German doctrine struggled to counter. German Panzer tactics emphasized maneuver and concentration of force, with vehicles operating in coordinated formations. This doctrine worked brilliantly when German tanks could force engagements on their terms. But M10 crews refused to fight on German terms. They engaged from unexpected positions, fired from maximum range, and vanished before German tactics could be applied. The frustration this caused German commanders appears repeatedly in captured documents. "The Americans will not stand and fight," complained one Panzer officer, missing the point entirely. American tank destroyer doctrine never intended to stand and fight. The mission was to destroy German tanks while preserving American tank destroyers for future engagements. Trading an M10 for a Panther might seem like a fair exchange given that Panthers cost far more to build, but preserving the M10 meant it could kill multiple Panthers over time. The asymmetric approach maximized American advantages in production and training while minimizing German advantages in vehicle technology. By March 1945, with Allied forces driving deep into Germany, M10 battalions found themselves increasingly facing German armor operated by undertrained crews with inadequate fuel and ammunition. The engagements became lopsided, with experienced American crews destroying German vehicles before inexperienced German crews could effectively return fire. The battlefield had evolved from contests between technologies to contests between training and doctrine, and American superiority in both became overwhelming. The final M10 combat actions in Europe came in late April, and early May 1945 as German forces collapsed. Some M10 battalions encountered German armor, still attempting organized resistance. More often, they found abandoned German vehicles, out of fuel or broken down, crews having fled or surrendered. The weapon that had killed so many Panthers and Tigers ended the war destroying far less formidable targets, testament to how completely German armor strength had been destroyed. The last recorded M10 kill of World War II in Europe occurred on May 7, 1945, the day before V-Day. An M10 of the 602nd Tank Destroyer Battalion engaged a Panther that had apparently not received surrender orders. The Panther was hit at 1,100 yards, penetrated through the side armor, and destroyed. The German crew survived and surrendered. It was a fitting end. An M10 using its doctrinal advantages to kill German armor at long range before the enemy could return fire, exactly as designed. When the war ended, the U.S. Army immediately began decommissioning excess equipment. Thousands of M10s were scrapped, their materials recycled. Others were transferred to allied nations or placed in storage. The vehicle that had proven so effective in combat was no longer needed in a world where the enemy it was designed to fight had been defeated. But the lessons of M10 combat service influenced American armor doctrine for decades. The emphasis on firepower and mobility over protection continued in post-war tank destroyer development. The recognition that well-trained crews and adequate vehicles could defeat superior technology through tactical excellence became foundational to American military thinking. The M10 proved that specifications matter less than application, that doctrine drives success more than engineering, and that the side with adequate technology employed brilliantly will defeat superior technology employed poorly. In 1985, on the 40th anniversary of V-Day, veterans of American tank destroyer battalions held a reunion at Fort Hood, Texas. Over 400 veterans attended, most having served in M10s during the war. Among them was former Staff Sergeant John McQuaid of the 702nd Tank Destroyer Battalion, who had commanded an M10 from Normandy through Germany. "We knew the M10 wasn't a perfect vehicle," McQuaid stated during the reunion ceremony. "We knew it was a death trap if we screwed up. The armor couldn't stop anything. The open-top men artillery could kill us easy. The turret traverse was so slow we had to turn the whole vehicle to engage quickly. But we also knew that if we did our jobs right, positioned well, shot straight, and moved fast, we could kill any German tank built. And we did. Thousands of them." The Germans laughed at us when they first saw M10s, called them half-tracks with guns, said we were suicidal for riding in vehicles with no armor. But they stopped laughing when that 76mm gun started talking. Because it didn't matter how thick your armor was if our first shot went through your side at 1,000 yards and you never got a shot at all. That was the M10 secret. Not better armor or a bigger gun. Better tactics, better training, and the sense to use what we had the right way. Former Sergeant Lafayette Pool, attending the same reunion at age 65, added his perspective. "I killed more German tanks than I can remember in that M10. Panthers, Tigers, Panzer IVs, assault guns. Every type they had. Not because my vehicle was better than theirs, it wasn't. Because I knew how to use my vehicle, and they didn't know how to counter it. The Germans kept trying to force us into straight-up armor duels where their advantages would matter. We kept refusing, shooting them from ambush and disappearing before they could respond. After a while, they got afraid of us. You could tell. They'd spot an M10 position and back off instead of attacking. Once you've got the enemy afraid to fight you, you've already won." The M10 Wolverine, as it was officially designated though crews rarely use the name, served in combat for approximately 21 months of intensive warfare across North Africa, Italy, France, Germany, and the Pacific Theater. During that period, the 6,406 vehicles produced equipped over 40 American tank destroyer battalions and 16 British/Commonwealth regiments. These units were credited with destroying approximately 3,652 German tanks and assault guns, plus additional soft targets, fortifications, and other vehicles. The loss rate varied by theater and time period, but American tank destroyer forces typically lost between 1 M10 for every 3 to 7 German armored vehicles destroyed. Given that German tanks generally cost more to produce, required more resources, and took longer to build than M10s, even a 3-to-1 exchange ratio represented overwhelming American advantage. At the actual achieved ratios of 5-to-1 or better, the exchange was catastrophically unfavorable to Germany. More significantly, the M10's combat effectiveness validated an entire doctrinal approach to anti-armor warfare. The success of tank destroyer battalions influenced post-war American armor doctrine, led to development of improved vehicles like the M36 and M18, and demonstrated that specialized units with clear missions could outperform more generalized forces. The U.S. Army's continued emphasis on combined arms operations, where specialized units work together rather than trying to create one vehicle that does everything, traces directly to lessons learned from M10 operations. The German assessment of American tank destroyers evolved from mockery in 1943 to respect bordering on fear by 1945. This transformation appears in thousands of captured documents, prisoner interrogations, and post-war interviews. German tank commanders who survived the war consistently cited American tank destroyers, particularly the M10, as among the most dangerous threats they faced. Oberst Hans von Luck, one of Germany's most experienced armor commanders, stated in his 1989 memoir, "The American M10 taught us that technological superiority means nothing if the enemy refuses to fight where your superiority applies. We built better tanks. This is undeniable. But Americans built adequate tanks and used them brilliantly. The M10 with its thin armor and medium gun killed more German armor than we killed of them because American crews knew their business, and we kept trying to fight a war that no longer existed. By 1944, we were still thinking about 1940-style armor warfare. The Americans had moved on to a new way of fighting, and we never caught up." The final testament to M10 effectiveness came from an unexpected source. In 1952, the newly formed Bundeswehr, West Germany's post-war military, was evaluating armor for its defensive forces. Among the vehicles considered were surplus American M10s available through military aid programs. German military analysts, many of whom had served in the Wehrmacht, evaluated the M10 with the benefit of hindsight and combat experience on the receiving end. Their assessment, preserved in Bundeswehr archives, provides the clearest possible validation. The M10 tank destroyer, while dated by current standards, represents sound tactical thinking. The emphasis on firepower and mobility over protection is appropriate for defensive operations in Central European terrain. The vehicle's thin armor, criticized by Wehrmacht commanders during the war, proved less of a liability than anticipated because properly employed tank destroyers engage from positions where armor thickness is less relevant than gun performance and crew quality. The M10's combat record against Wehrmacht armor demonstrates that doctrinal excellence can defeat technical superiority. This is a lesson the Bundeswehr must remember. The irony was not lost on observers. German military planners in 1952 praising the same vehicle their predecessors had mocked in 1943, now understanding what battlefield experience had taught. The M10 they had called a half-track with a gun had proven itself in the crucible of combat, and post-war analysis confirmed what American tank destroyer crews had known all along. Specifications matter less than how you fight. In the decades since World War II, military historians have consistently ranked the M10 among the most effective Allied armored vehicles of the war when success is measured by combat results rather than specifications. Its kill ratio exceeded most Allied tanks. Its operational availability remained high throughout the war. Its cost effectiveness was excellent. And most importantly, it accomplished its design mission, killing enemy tanks in quantities that materially contributed to Allied victory. The preserved M10s in museums around the world stand as monuments not just to American industrial capacity, though 6,406 vehicles represents impressive production, but to the principle that tactical excellence matters more than technological superiority. Visitors can see the thin 37mm armor, that German tank commanders mocked. They can observe the open turret that exposed crews to artillery. They can note the ungainly appearance that inspired German laughter in 1943. What they cannot see from the silent museum displays is what German tank crews learned in combat. That the 76mm gun mounted in that thin armored hull was lethal beyond its specifications when fired by trained American gunners who knew where to aim. That the open turret provided visibility advantages that helped crews spot German armor before being spotted themselves. That the ungainly appearance masked a vehicle perfectly designed for its intended mission. The M10 Wolverine entered combat to German derision and ended the war having destroyed thousands of German tanks. The vehicle that Panzer crews laughed at in 1943 was the same vehicle that German tactical bulletins warned about in 1945, recommending that German armor avoid engagement and use artillery instead. The ultimate admission that American tank destroyers had won the tactical contest. The transformation from mockery to fear took less than 2 years. In that time, the M10 76mm gun talked to German armor in a language they understood all too well. The sound of armor-piercing rounds punching through steel, followed by the secondary explosions of ammunition detonation and fuel fires. German Panzer crews who survived M10 encounters never laughed at them again. The last word belongs to Hauptmann Werner, who commanded Tigers on both eastern and western fronts and survived to become one of Germany's highest-scoring tank aces. In his 1992 memoir, he reflected on his experiences against various Allied armor. Of all the Allied tank destroyers, the M10 was perhaps the most dangerous because its crews understood their limitations and fought accordingly. A Tiger or Panther crewed by average soldiers was less threatening than an M10 crewed by experts. The Americans produced experts. We produced excellent tanks and gave them to whoever was available. By 1944, that meant teenagers with minimal training. The Americans in their thin-skinned M10s killed us with regularity because they knew their business, and we had run out of time to learn ours. I faced M10s in Normandy in Germany. I never underestimated them after the first encounter. You would spot one in a hull-down position, and you knew either you find a way to flank it and get a side shot, or you back off, because if you attack frontally, that 76mm is going to punch through your side armor when you maneuver, and American gunners don't miss often. We learned to fear the crack of that gun. It meant another German tank was finished. People ask me which Allied tank I feared most. They expect me to say the Sherman Firefly with its 17-pounder, or the Soviet T-34, or perhaps the late-war Pershing. But honestly, the M10 killed more German tanks I knew personally than any other Allied vehicle. Not because it was the best tank destroyer, technically, it wasn't. Because American crews made it the most effective through how they fought. That's a lesson that transcends World War II. The best vehicle operated poorly will lose to an adequate vehicle operated brilliantly. The M10 was proof. The M10 tank destroyer stands as testament to a fundamental truth of warfare. Victory belongs not to the side with the best specifications, but to the side that best employs what they have. The Germans built Tigers and Panthers that were engineering marvels, technically superior to anything the Americans fielded. But Americans built M10s in quantity, crewed them with trained soldiers, supported them with robust logistics, and employed them according to doctrine that maximized their strengths while minimizing their weaknesses. The result was one of the most lopsided exchanges in armored warfare history. German supertanks destroyed by American death traps at ratios that should have been impossible if specifications determined outcomes. But specifications don't determine outcomes. Training, doctrine, logistics, and industrial capacity determine outcomes. In all of those categories, America overwhelmed Germany, and the M10's combat record proves it. The Panzer crews stopped laughing when the 76mm gun started talking. By then, it was far too late. The vehicle they had mocked was destroying German armor faster than German industry could replace it, operated by crews whose tactical excellence German training could no longer match, supported by logistics German planners couldn't comprehend. The M10 wasn't the perfect tank destroyer. It was something more important. It was good enough, produced in sufficient quantity, and employed brilliantly. In the end, that was all it needed to be. The thousands of destroyed German tanks, with 76 mm penetrations through their armor, told the story more eloquently than any specification sheet ever could. The M10 had spoken, and German armor had listened. By the time they learned to respect what they had mocked, the war was already lost.